something that begins outside of ourselves. Someone calls us. It doesn't come from within, it comes from without. And it actually includes not just jobs and work, but it includes our family relationships. It includes our, if we were born in a certain country, that means we were called to be a citizen there. If we live in a neighborhood, we are called to be neighbors. If we are siblings or children or parents or spouses, those are callings.
Welcome to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. Now, let's get to work.
All right, well, Dr. Karen Swallow-Prior, welcome back to A Theology of Hustle. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me again.
I love it. So you're in rarefied air. I mean, I think besides my wife, there's been only one other person on twice. So kind of a big deal. You know?
Wow. I'm on the very short list.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I saw your book come out, You Have a Calling, and it was like, how could I not? I mean, it was just perfect. Like you said, made for what we're doing. So I love it. So I went back and listened to our other podcast. That's been almost 4 years ago.
Wow.
Seems crazy. And at the time, you in your work, you had, done 21 years at Liberty, and now we're in a new role teaching. And I think that's not true anymore. You've made another vocational change. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. And, I was in the midst, the part of where this book comes from is making that change. So I'm now I'm my own boss now, speaking and writing full time and doing a lot of podcasts. So
I love it. You got the whole setup. You're good to go. That's hustling. You're hustling.
I am.
I love it. Okay. So I guess before we kind of get into the book, we're going to spend a lot of time in the book, but I'd love to know kind of, this transition out of teaching into kind of being your own boss and how has that been for you? Probably.
Yeah. So, I mean, just, the short version of how that happened is it wasn't necessarily my intent. I still, I'm at the age where I could have been a classroom professor for another 10 years, but, so many things are going on in the world, especially in higher education. It just seemed better for me to leave the post that I had for a number of reasons. And sometimes I think, especially when we're talking about all the AI issues and student plagiarism, I'm like, oh man, thank you, Lord, for saving me from dealing with the worst of that. I'm a little too old to learn those new tricks, but I do see, I have been in the speaking and writing space for over a decade now. And so I was actually gradually teaching less in the classroom and doing more writing and speaking. So in some ways, even though it was an abrupt shift, it was also something I feel like the Lord had been preparing me for a long time. And as it turns out, I really do enjoy working from home, which is what I'm always at home unless I'm out traveling and speaking. And so it's a quieter and more contemplative life. And I'm actually still teaching. I mean, the things that I write are, teacherly things. I have a really wonderful Substack newsletter that's been going 2 years, and I've been teaching the British literature that I love through that. And so in some ways, as I talk about in the book, I mean, sometimes it comes down to words, but words are important. So in some ways, one particular vocation or calling ended, we could say, but we could also say if my primary vocation or calling is teaching, then really I'm still doing that, but it's taken a different form. And so I think that's a helpful way to think about calling. One helpful way to think about calling.
Yeah, I love that. I love talking about all it. Has there been something surprising that you didn't expect in this transition, be it good or bad? Is there something that just kind of you didn't realize was going to happen as you kind of made that transition?
Yeah, well, I think, there've been a number of surprising things. I mean, one of them has been, actually a couple of them have been other opportunities, particularly even in academia, that have opened up. I've taken a remote teaching position with the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, Canada. which is a very, very historied and respected institution, a graduate institution. And I've just been named the Carlson Scholar at Bethel University. And so these are like, these are distinct roles with a short term, and yet I'm able to continue my academic life in a different way. And and that's been a surprise because because I'm not one place, other places have reached out. But I think the biggest surprise, which I mentioned already, is just the love I have of being at home. I've always tested, little TMI here, but I've always tested like half introvert and half extrovert. And so I can do both things pretty easily, but I'm really leaning into my introvert side now and learning to love her. So
I love that. I love it. Different seasons. And it's almost like God knew what he was doing on this crazy journey that you're on. It's
yeah,
amazing how that works
amazing.
out. Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. That's good stuff. Okay. So something I was curious about is like post COVID and stuff. I quit the podcast for about 3 years.
Hmm.
And now I'm coming back to it. And previously I was very engaged on social media. I was engaged in a lot of different places, and like I took years off. I'm still not really back on, aside from the occasional Instagram post these days. And I just wonder, how has your public engagement changed over this
Oh.
time? Because I know that was a big part. You kind of blew up on Twitter, or at least
Mhm.
had some posts that could be considered. You were in the fray, I guess I should say. So has that changed, or are you still just grinding it out?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and something I do think a lot about, because I would say first of all that, sort of for me, my primary social media outlet had been for a long time Twitter, now X. That place has changed for anyone who hasn't noticed or anyone who's wise enough not to even, bother with it. So it has changed just in ways so that you have to post certain things and certain kinds of things in order for the algorithms to pump out your stuff, right? And I don't do those things. um I still am me. I still post, I'll post some things that I'll be like, hey, 3 years ago this would have gotten, thousands of likes, and now it's got 20, whatever, it's fine, I'm still me. And I'll give a confession here. So if anyone out there listening, if you want to make dreams come true, um, if I had no worries at all in the world about, health insurance and food and roof over my head, um, I would not be on social media. Probably, I would pop on now and then to say something, but I would um sit with my books in my developing library and talk to the real people in my life and spend more, and just not. I
Yeah.
would love to go back to how life was before social media. That's not going to happen. But the reality of it is that if you are an author, you have to have an audience, a presence, so people know you exist and are interested in your work. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not even complaining about it. I like to joke about Stephen King because I do love Stephen King. I grew up reading him. I still like to read him now and then as a not guilty pleasure. And I think if I were Stephen King, but then I look at Stephen King and he's like all over Twitter. So even he does that. But I will say to answer your question more directly, I've changed the way that I use social media. And I would say, and this isn't necessarily the purview of what we're talking about, maybe it is. I think I am a recovering culture warrior. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of them is that what I have seen is that no matter which side of an issue you are on social media, just being on a side actually makes that's the game. That's the game. It's like, it doesn't even matter what you're arguing for or advocating for. Right now, I think the real issue is our attention spans, our formation, our minds, and our hearts. It doesn't matter which side you're arguing on social media. It is working against the healthy formation of our minds, our souls, our lives, and our habits, and our spiritual formation. And so, that's what it is right now. It may change. The printing press has been around a long time and done a lot of things, good and bad. And so we're in this age. And so right now I have changed the amount and manner in which I engage on social media, but I'm still out there. I have to be.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, it is part of work. I mean, we'll get into this, but kind of part of the job,
Yep.
as we'll get into your 4-part kind of stratification of work that you do. It's part of something that you have to do. And in so many ways, selling books involves being on, and in so many ways, like being part of that culture war is what gets the likes and like brings people together in some ways. And I wonder how much, and I think the printing press is a great example of this. People thought like reading fiction was going to like destroy the world, at some point. And they thought this is like a really dangerous thing. And now it's just, part of who we are. But the technology is moving so much faster. I mean, it's so much more ubiquitous than the printing press was, when it first came out. And I wonder how much less it is actual social media per se, and how much more it is the algorithms, like you said. Like if we can work to get rid of some of those, then social media could be something really good at some point. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's a really helpful distinction, because I've been on social media since for almost 20 years, I think, early on. And it is more the algorithms, and I don't think that's going to change because there is so much profit to be made from that. But you're right. That is a very helpful distinction, and it's part of what's changed, and part of, maybe it will change again in the future.
Who knows what, what legislation could just get hot and go, who knows?
Right.
I would love to see that, because I think it is a very useful tool that's just been like, usurped in its usefulness.
I totally agree. Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. Yeah. I'm actually, you've made me a little bit more hopeful. So thank you.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for. Just bringing the hope. So I love it. Okay. So let's get into the book. So you've recently released a book. You have a calling, actually on it right here. And it's like, I gotta tell you, it's beautiful. Not only is the cover and like it's very well done. It's one I'm going to have to go back and like read a few times, I think, because there is a lot there. Have you been getting similar feedback as people have read through it?
I have. I mean, it's only officially been out for, a few days at this point, but it was a slow release, so with lots of advanced copies. So the kind of feedback I'm getting has been coming, slowly rolling in over time. And a number of people have said that. And I love that, because, as a literature person, I always say, well, great literature is defined in part by its rereadability. So I love to hear that. But of course, thank you. And please do reread it. But I do think, and I was intentional about this, but I also maybe succeeded more than I thought I would, which is I really am building a case throughout the book. It's a short book, but I'm building a case and building toward a culmination, which, spoiler alert, and we'll get to this, the last chapter is on the beautiful. Like, the beautiful is my favorite thing. So, and so I'm building toward that. But I guess what I didn't see that many people have said is that so much more that I said earlier would be more meaningful and make more sense going back and rereading it. And I'm like, it is a short book, so that's, I wouldn't want people to feel like, oh, I missed it all. But I think it's just more the richness and layeredness of it, which is just, I'm so grateful that you said that, and others have as well.
Yeah. I think too, I mean, you're including a lot of outside sources, right? So like some of the poetry and stuff, I feel like I just didn't even have the space or the time necessarily to like really give it a reading like I should. And then, wrestle with your argument, I guess, based on some of that. And so like, you're bringing in all this amazing literature and stuff. And I'm just like, I need more time to kind of soak, I guess. It's one you need to soak in a little bit.
Oh, well, I am so glad it is that. Thank you.
Certainly. Well, and I've been doing, okay. So I'm kind of realizing, I think, I did the podcast. While I was a pastor, I've always been kind of bivocational. I guess I'm going to say I've been working 2 jobs that make me money. we'll get into some of like what vocation means in some of these
Mhm,
things.
mhm,
So I was doing that and kind of coming back to the podcast, and I just really missed it. Like I think it
mhm,
was very much a calling. I'm realizing how much I was just working out my struggles
mhm,
with work through just like interviewing a bunch of people, you know? And
mhm,
so I feel like maybe you experienced something similar, which was the basis for writing the book. Is that kind of what was
mhm.
happening there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say because I actually to go back to your earlier question about social media, I actually um experience social media usage as a calling. I really do for a number of reasons, and so and that's why I'm conflicted because really I don't necessarily like it or enjoy. I mean, obviously I do to some extent, but I really sense it as a calling, and one that has been confirmed over and over again by people who give me feedback. And
Mm.
then it is actually social media that presented a conflict with my last paying job, my last job. Like I don't know. I think I just say things that are true and I try to say them well. but but apparently it steps on too many toes. And so in I was basically given a choice between if I could keep my job if I got off of social media. And I don't value social media that much, but I do value my voice and my call,
Ooh.
and I also value me having agency over myself. And so that's the calling that I chose. And so yes, I've changed the way I work on social media, what I do on social media. I orient it more toward this calling now as a speaker and a writer. But you're right. Sometimes you do need to, and this is something I say in other ways in the book, like you can have the same calling, but it might take a different form. And you also your calling if you're called to serve your neighbor and to glorify God in doing that, you also have to take care of your own soul too, and you have to be wise about your internal resources and external resources as you do that. And sometimes taking a break or stepping away, or taking letting that call take a different form is just wise stewardship.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, that's very good. I appreciate you delving into that. I'm sorry to hear that that was part of your story. It's hard when work, yeah, puts us in those positions.
Hmm.
So
And I,
yeah,
I do want to say, I want to say because to give a bigger picture, most people who have jobs are not allowed to go out and for example, my brother was the CEO of a large medical care provider. He couldn't go out on social media and blab his
yeah,
opinions about this or that. So right, so
yeah,
most people don't have the luxury of letting their voices be heard on every issue and keeping their jobs. But in my case, it was just a little bit different because that's always been kind of my job. I publish books on cultural engagement and so forth. So it was a little bit trickier, but it was an opportunity for me to really just try to discern what God's ultimate calling was for me and to follow that. And most every day realize that I have made the right decision. So,
there you go. You gotta love that. That's good stuff right there. Something I really appreciate about the book is that you do make an argument throughout the book. And I have found in reading a lot of these books and having a lot of these discussions is that sometimes we can talk about the way that we're working and how it's not working. We can critique culture and our culture of work. And that becomes like the whole book. And then there's like this much at the end. And
hmm.
what I appreciated is that you critique the way we're working and pointed out some of the issues with work today, but then made a substantive case for a better vision for
Mm,
work. So let's just maybe start with that way we're not working. Like
mm,
what has happened to work in your
mm.
opinion?
Yeah, no. So this is, I mean, it one of the things I love about studying literature is that it forces me to study history. I never really liked history as a student, but when I started studying literature, I was like, oh, history is kind of cool. It helps me understand the literature more. And so having this broader perspective and again, I just really deal with sort of like modern Western history, so the last 500 years and one half of the globe. But even in that small snippet, if we look back, we can see how the world has been very different. Therefore, culture has been different, and work has been different, and therefore attitudes about work have been different. So it really, I mean, this is true of anything, but simply recognizing that our particular cultural moment in which we assume certain things about the way things are supposed to be or are or should be, is for the there are universal transcendent truths, but most of what we experience in culture is very passing. And so what I in one section of the book, I simply look at the past several generations of Americans and work. And this isn't stretch. We all know this. So we can look back at our grandparents, or well, for some of your young, people younger than me, maybe your great grandparents. And so there are exceptions, but most of our great grandparents and grandparents were just working to survive, right? I mean,
Right.
there might be a few millionaire people out there, but they were just working to survive and to support their families, and they didn't have they weren't following their dreams or their passions for the most part. There were a few pioneers maybe who did that, and then you've got the baby boomer generation, and they were sort of like career oriented, like really trying to step up the ladder and pursue success and materialism and those things, and their children paid a price for that, and they paid a price for that. And so now we're in this, and again, these are all very, we're talking like 20-year time spans, right? Or 30-year time spans. And then by the time we get to Gen Z and younger, and we're living in this gig economy, this hustle economy, we see work as very different as well. Now again, the thing that hasn't changed is that every human being has to provide a roof over their heads and food on the table and so forth. But the meaning of the means of that has changed and does change over time. And so now I've kind of lost track of your question, but it's that historical perspective that helps us to understand that every generation is dealing with these questions a little bit differently. And our generation has its goodness, and kind of get something right, whatever generation you're in, but also we're going to get something wrong, and the next generation is going to correct that perhaps and then get their own thing wrong. And so work is no exception to that. The way that we think about work has changed just radically in the past century.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of times we get in this mode where it's the water we swim in, right? So we don't realize that what we're experiencing is abnormal.
Right.
And it can seem like everybody else has it figured out somehow. You look around, you're like, oh, they like their job, and like they've been climbing the corporate ladder forever. Why am I stuck here or feeling this way? And so I think just even naming some of those issues could be a major part of this.
Yes. And I mean, and one of the, there are several prompts for this book, but one of the primary ones was, again, coming from teaching college age students for 2.5 decades. I was seeing how they were getting this message that became an underlying assumption that you are to pursue your passion and you'll never work a day in your life, or just like, that's what you're supposed to do. And I had devastated, disillusioned, confused, disappointed students and still today from, former students who come to me because they thought that they were just supposed to pursue their passion and they would have, provide well for themselves and feel fulfilled. And that's not happening for many of them. Life isn't turning. And it's not to say that they don't have good work and good homes and good family lives. It has nothing to do with that. It's really just that they thought that they failed somehow. And that's to me, that's a tragedy, to think that to think of yourself as a failure because you didn't achieve something that was never a truth or even a realistic expectation at all. The problem is the unrealistic, ideal that's put out there, not you, the person who didn't reach that.
Yeah, this is where I might need to raise my hand and show myself as part of this. problem. Been in therapy, we're working through it, but because, and this is something I was thinking a lot about in your book. I felt like I was called to be a pastor. I still do. Being a pastor is my calling. I was 19 when I got that calling. I didn't even know what pastors did. But I felt called to do that. And I think looking back now, I'm no longer, I do ministry, but I work a full-time corporate job now. And I think looking back, I started to believe the lie that just getting to my calling and getting to work it was going to solve like all of my problems and probably meet emotional needs that I was trying to fulfill through working on my calling. So as I was a bivocational pastor, my thought became, if only I could just be pastoring full time, then all of these needs would get met. And I got that, and it didn't meet those needs. And so where is it, like, how do we get into this mindset where like calling is going to, like, working your calling is going to fulfill all of your needs,
No, thank you for being transparent about that, because I think what you described in some form or another is something that many in these several generations have struggled with. And I do, and the two things I want to say about that, I want to say in the larger cultural context, we do have partly the American dream to blame. I think the American dream is wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but there are distortions of it and distorted applications of it. So this idea that, again, you think of the immigrant families from the 19th century who first came to America with nothing, and we're coming into a new life, and the American dream for them was for that to create a life that would be better for their children. So no matter where they came from, their children would have it better. And we've done that for generation upon generation. And then we just kind of reached a peak. Like now we're on a kind of decline, which is only natural and, happens throughout history. It just is not fun to be part of the decline. And so there's this larger cultural context, and it's more complicated, but I think that's one helpful sort of way to understand it. But then we've done the same thing in the church, right? That we've done the same. We've sort of isolated ministry and significance and saving the world, whether through being a pastor or in some form of ministry or being a missionary, like the spiritual work. We have exalted that to such a high place that we have ignored or diminished the importance of the mundane and the ordinary and the material, physical ways we have to provide for ourselves and our neighbors, which is just, that's how God created us. We have to do that. But we have minimized its significance. And so therefore we have a mindset that takes less joy in those things and puts too much pressure on the other really important spiritual things, when it really should it's all part of one holistic package. That now, that I'm getting into the Protestant Reformation and the theology of work or whatever, that's a different question. But I think that's the context that we're in that makes us prone to this distorted understanding of vocation and fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, with pastors, like if you could convince somebody that it's the highest calling, you can pay them a lot less because, the calling does some of the work there. So we'll leave that one there, maybe. But
there's some truth there. So if the shoe fits.
That's right. That's right. The mundane. I love thinking and talking about the mundane because I sense, and my experience is that our world thinks that, like, unless you're doing big things, especially in the Christian world, unless you're doing these amazing things and people know about you and there's notoriety, that you're just not that valuable maybe to the world in some ways. And so there's these like really insidious little lies. And I think you bring it up in the book. I mean, Paul, calls us to a life of being really mundane in a lot of ways, just walking out a normal life of work and glorifying God through the mundane, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and Jesus too. And I was thinking, there's so much in the Bible, so much about the stillness and the quiet and the small things and the way of Jesus, which is not was he kept telling everyone, no, I'm not here to turn over the political powers and to dominate the earthly realm. I mean, so there's so much in the Bible that teaches the opposite of what our expectations are. And then, I was thinking of Paul because I think, well, of course, there are a couple of dramatic examples like Moses, and Paul himself. I mean, Paul had a dramatic conversion and and he became really, really important in Christianity because he wrote like half of the New Testament or something like that. And so, in some ways, his ministry was dramatic, but he paid such a cost, right? I mean, I'll be totally honest. I would rather focus on the ordinary and mundane than be in prison. And so,
It's a good point.
and so, we just don't get the whole picture. The few people who are used to make history, are part of a bigger fabric, but also there's also a great cost. And so, but there's so much joy and satisfaction that can be had in the ordinary and mundane. And we miss it if we're looking for something else that's not there or not ours to follow.
Yeah, for sure. This is a little short aside, and I know Lord of the Rings is not the only literature I've read on reading well. I have it right here, so I understand this. But I always like to think about the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, and like, man, the hobbits are an example of this to me. Like, they're just like very simple people, and they carry on, they party, they hang out, they like live like pretty mundane lives, especially compared to the other characters, these elves and these wizards. And it's God's mission that's carried out through the mundane in so many ways. Like, it's only the people who are mundane that are able to walk out that calling in so many ways. And I love how he brought that out in that work. So yeah,
Where most of us are called to be hobbits.
yeah, exactly. And I think we should be like really
And that's
okay with
wonderful.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think we'll get to your truth and goodness and beauty in work. And I want to talk about that. But you see a lot of like, that's what the hobbits were doing in so many ways. They just appreciated like very simple things and like, appreciated community. And yeah, let's be hobbits. I think maybe a t-shirt or something. I don't know. We can talk about that, the branding there. Yeah. So let's start constructing like a positive vision for work then. Can we define terms before we get into any of this? Because I feel like I even get really confused sometimes on what we're talking about when we're talking about work, calling, vocation, all of that.
Right. And so again, I'm a word person, English professor, so I do take a little time in the book to define the terms. And I do find it helpful to think about like Venn diagrams, even though that wasn't something I could include in the book, because oftentimes, there are these circles, these categories, and they might overlap or they might not, but I think it's just helpful to think about how they are distinct. And so work is something we all have to do, whether we're working in our paying jobs or we're working in the yard or, working in the house, working a relationship, working out a date for coffee. It's all these things require some effort. And then, so that's one category. And then there's the job, which we generally mean in this context, the thing that brings money into the house, because somebody's got to bring money into the house. And then there's career, which is kind of like a trajectory of jobs that we care about, we're passionate about, we want to move in a certain direction, we have a career. A career maybe, hopefully is something that we love and enjoy doing. And that again is related to income. But calling transcends all of those. We could have a job that fulfills our calling or not. We could have a career that fulfills our calling or not. We're going to have to work at it. But calling is that thing that we talked about earlier that is a bigger purpose, and it might change over time. It might take a different form. But calling is also, and I use the terms calling and vocation interchangeably because they really mean the same thing. It's something that begins outside of ourselves. Someone calls us. It doesn't come from within, it comes from without. And it actually includes not just jobs and work, but it includes our family relationships. It includes our, if we were born in a certain country, that means we were called to be a citizen there. If we live in a neighborhood, we are called to be neighbors. If we are siblings or children or parents or spouses, those are callings. We obviously have some choice in the matter, but we didn't get to choose to be so and so son or daughter. That just happened, right? So that's a calling. And so thinking about callings in all of those contexts, I think, is important because we exist in multiple callings all of the time. And then when we think about the work we do, we may have work that is a calling, or we may have work, as most of our grandparents did, that just fulfilled our calling to provide for our families. It was
Yeah.
a means to that greater end.
For sure. And I really appreciate you going through that, because they get all muddled, right? And like there's this really push to like work out your calling through your job a lot of times. Like when we use these things interchangeably a lot of times, with this assumption that like you should be working a job that just meets, your calling and meets these needs. And like as I have walked this road, I've realized that like a job needs to meet specific needs, mostly
Right.
money, and in
Right.
our country, unfortunately, insurance.
Right.
Insurance is just such a burden.
It
We don't
is.
we don't talk enough about the gig economy and insurance, and I'm sure you could
I,
perhaps
I'm
elaborate.
I'm learning all new lessons in that. Yes.
I've done a long time. There's a reason I worked at Starbucks for a decade, and it was
Mhm.
mostly insurance.
Mhm.
And so yeah, we have all this. I totally lost my train of thought, but I love that that you parse these out. And right, they're not the same. Like your job does not have to be everything to you,
Right.
but what needs is a meeting, and how do we think through that? Yeah, I think that's really helpful.
Well, I'm a word person, and so and of course, sometimes they can all overlap, but I think that's very, very rare, and it's simply that our expectation that they will that has caused so much confusion and disillusionment.
Well, and it's seasonal too, right? What makes sense in
Right.
your 20s or 30s, it won't make sense, or
Right.
maybe, makes different sense in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. And like you can, like, I think you're such a great example. Like you talked about your calling and how you're fulfilling your calling, but in a different way now, like
Mhm.
through different work, through a different job. And so, we're, yeah, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for like being in whatever season we're in, and
Right. Right.
like if when we feel like, especially when we're in liminal space, where we're like don't know where we're heading, that could be like a real trigger to get anxious about a lot of this conversation, I think.
Right, and some of that anxiety is artificially constructed because,
Yeah.
again, we just have wrong definitions, terms, expectations, and ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you go about thinking about like what to do next? Like how do we go about constructing like, kind of walking out our calling? I'm sure you have a 6-step plan, right? That we can just
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I actually have no plan and no formula, but I do think that there God makes us a certain way for a reason, and he also part of our calling is the time and place that he creates us in that is not our choice. And so I think, we do want to look to our gifts and passions. That's not automatic, that will be our job or our calling, but they are guides and cues. But also the time and place that we live in, which has its own needs. So so how can we with our in our place with our gifts, with our abilities and in this time fulfill a particular need where we live. And so, and some people move and that's fine, but we can't time hop. And so that's a constraint as well. And so already we know that this happens in community, and we can be even more intentional. We can look for the needs in our community. We can ask the people in our community, how can I help? What am I good at? How do you see me best serving a need? And then the other thing is to just and again, this comes from being old and giving counsel to younger people for so many years, but just the idea of being patient and just moving one step at a time, like doing the thing that's in front of you, doing it well, and seeing where that goes, because there is a kind of momentum that builds as you take one step at a time, fulfill that well, or learn something new about yourself or other things. Like, I talk in the book about doing my college internship and discovering that I hated that line of work. And so that was a very valuable lesson. So that it was just kind of like, okay, not that. So let's see what else there is. There's a natural learning curve and a natural process that takes place over time that is not meant to be forced. And so we do need to have patience and to use discernment and be intentional. That's my
Yeah.
formula.
We hate that though.
Yeah. It
It's
goes against everything our culture values right now. Yeah.
It does. And slowness and waiting. I mean, we're not good at waiting. And I think I look back on a lot of these transition points for me. And it's always like, when I'm in that space where I feel like I'm grinding out,
Mhm.
the job that I'm working or whatever. I just feel like I'm having to grind. It's like, should I just be pushing harder? Like, should I just be like hustling, like in a different way? Like, am I missing God's call? Like, these are the sorts of questions I start to think. And I love how you just kind of like, maybe let's calm down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, the waiting is okay. Like, not having it all figured out for a time is okay. And I think there's
Mhm.
work. I was just thinking about this book, From Strength to Strength, that I recently read, and it talks about different types of work sort of peaks at different times in people's lives. Like, highly analytical work can kind of peak in your 30s, when your brain power is like, full gas. But there's other callings that don't really peak till later in life. Like, I think he uses the
Mhm.
example of the history professor. Like, you need 40 or 50 years of kind of like just marinating and pulling in this knowledge. I'm sure the literature is very much the same way. Like, you need time to like kind of be really soaking in these things before you can actually be at your peak in that sort
Mhm.
of career. And so many times, like, we just want to push ahead, beyond what God has. He has a plan for us, and we're just wanting to see it now.
Right,
So
right. And so many things take time. The
they
best things
do.
do.
They really do.
Mhm.
Another
Rats.
great teacher. I know, right? I know. I know. Uh, so you kind of formulate this construction towards the end of the book, which is truth, goodness, and beauty, and how we bring these things into our calling. Can you just talk a little bit about those maybe three truths and kind of highlight some aspects of them that people may need to hear?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I kind of spent the first half of the book talking about how or part of that talking about how our cultural understandings shift over time and things have been different across human history, and work changes and the realities of work change and the nature of work changes and the meaning. But then in this last part of the book where I talk about the true, the good and beautiful, I'm anchoring all these shifts and changes in these transcendentals that are absolute and universal and never change. And so I think it's helpful. That's why, like, those three things, if we're pursuing those, which I'll explain a little bit more, but if we're pursuing those, no matter where we live or when we live or what the work is that we're doing or what the demands of our life happen to be at that particular moment, if we're pursuing these things, that's kind of an anchor. And of course, so I teach literature, and so I teach literary aesthetics, and so the true, the good, the beautiful are like really important to me, and I'll talk about them anytime that I can. And it was just so experimental for me as I was writing this book to apply them to work and to calling. But in classical philosophy, the transcendentals, and again, we can find them addressed in the Bible and Christian theology, but also, the Greek philosophers from Plato to Aristotle and beyond talked a lot about these transcendentals, even though they weren't, they were pre-Christians or not Christians, but they understood them. And so as Christians, we understand that the true, the good and beautiful are all reflections of God. It's God's nature. He is those things. Um, but he also is the source of them. So we can't find those things unless we're like, even if we don't know it, we're actually looking for God when we look for the true, the good, and the beautiful. And so, again, these are classical philosophical terms that I try to apply as practically as I can to the world of work and vocation. And when I talk about the true, again, in this cultural moment in 21st century American Christianity, particularly evangelicalism, we talk about the truth a lot, and we love to talk about the truth. And I love the truth, don't get me wrong. But we've kind of limit our understanding of truth to like moral truth, and the same with goodness, moral goodness. And have overlooked the way truth matters in so many other ways, like the truth about material reality and spiritual reality, the truth of the work, the truth of what a certain kind of work demands, and how being true to that work is necessary in order for the work to be good. So in Christianity and the church, we really like to talk about how it's only the heart that matters or the intent, or I push back against that. God doesn't, what is it? God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's some truth in that, but the main truth that it's trying to convey is not good. So it's basically arguing for not knowing what you're doing and being inept at something. That's what it's arguing for.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's what God wants. I mean, he certainly does equip us, but we still have a responsibility of going all the way back to Genesis, to learn and to grow and to be skillful. And I mean, it would be wrong for me to commit heart surgery on someone. Very wrong, because I have no idea what I'm doing. But in church, we also like to be like, oh, let her do that. Let him do that. Oh, he can do that. He's got a heart or whatever. And it's like, no, maybe we should be calling the equipped and preparing the equipped and and developing our abilities and gifts so that people who are good at certain things can actually do them, and other people who are good at other things can do those. So we've not emphasized skill and expertise and knowledge enough in this particular cultural moment, I think. So that's kind of the one that I'm calling out. And then when we get to the beautiful, because I teach literary aesthetics, and we talk about this a lot, we tend to, we've adopted the assumption that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's a very subjective understanding of beauty. And we assume it's true, when in fact, for thousands of years, philosophers thought about beauty as being having objective qualities that we can assess and figure out. It's really, spoiler alert, it's really both, but Aquinas has a famous formulation that I cite in the book about the objective qualities of beauty being proportion, integrity, and luminosity. And again, if you think of a painting, you can imagine how those would play out. But think about the work that we do in the lives that we live, whether it's, big work, great work, or just the work we're doing, in our homes and families every day. We need to strive for proportionality, like giving everything what it's due at that moment, which can change in season. Integrity, which isn't just honesty, but it's also holism, like just bringing, our whole lives to that task of the moment, remembering our whole lives. And luminosity, that's my favorite one, is luminosity, which is really just, bringing light to the work and to the world. We are all called to illuminate truth and goodness. And when we do that, we are creating beauty and being beautiful. And that's what we should be striving for, no matter what our work is, no matter what our calling is.
There we go. That's just so uplifting. I just feel like I needed that. Yeah, so good. I love you bringing us back to those three, because what I saw in there was this juxtaposition that we have with even the garden, right? So we're in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve are working already. Work is a part of the pre-fall. And then when the fall comes, work is just made more difficult, the thorns and the thistles,
Right.
child, birth, as you bring up in the book. And in so many ways in our modern, I'm going to say white evangelicalism, we have gotten this sense that the world is evil and going to burn, and there's sort of nothing redeeming about it. And I had this real aha moment that, like, no, even though the fall is here and work is harder in some ways, there's still good. God said it was good. Right. And so what you're with those three formulations, what you're doing is calling us to a new creation type work where we're looking towards the goodness. Right. And I guess alongside maybe this fall that we still have to kind of work through the difficulty of working, we're calling us to something better, to the goodness that is there already. So I love that formulation.
Well, thank you. I mean, I just, I wouldn't want to live any other way. And I think that that's what God intended for us, is to, again, be co-laborers with him in stewarding this good creation that he made that is fallen, but still has so much goodness in it, for us.
Yeah. Real quick. Do you have maybe just a way that you go about seeking beauty? Just in your daily life that might be helpful, like if somebody was wanting to pursue that.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. I mean, there's so many ways. If anyone follows me I'm on all the social media accounts, but my favorite one, probably one of is Instagram. It's very low key, but I love to take pictures. I'm not a photographer. I just use my iPhone, and I have a very old iPhone. And so I love to take pictures of from my runs or from my flower gardens of my dogs. They're cute and beautiful and silly. And so, like, just visually noticing the beauty that's around me is one way. Of course, I read great literature. So that's, a lifestyle for me. And so there's a lot of beauty there. And even just simply the way that I, we live in an old house, and it's taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to bring it back together. But I care about, the way it's set up. I mean, my husband made the cabinets by hand, but they're beautiful. And he only did that because we were so poor we couldn't afford cabinets.
I get that. I've done the same thing. I've done the same thing. So,
but they're still I picked out the varnish and the handle, so they're still beautiful. And so, and I think it's a matter of emphasis. We all have we can expend our time and resources, and some ways we have no choice, but the ways in which we do have choice, whatever we can choose to invest in the beautiful things, whether they're objects or our time. If you're choosing, choosing a home, and like, do you want a home that is, a McMansion or some variation, or one that's maybe smaller and has enough room to plant some flowers, right? I mean, these are decisions that we make, and there isn't necessarily right or wrong for all of us in those decisions, but we need to be intentional about them. And we have to be intentional about choosing beauty, because the ugliness is just naturally attracts us and is all around us. And so we have to be countercultural in cultivating and choosing beauty.
Love it. Countercultural. Yes. It strikes me too that involves slowness, and it involves waiting.
Yes.
Not stuff we like to do that much. So that's it. That's a great word. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, are you good if we jump into our final two questions as we wrap up here?
Great.
So my first question, which you've answered previously, so I'll see if you need to redo this. Edit. So my first question is, what is the strangest job that you have ever done? And I believe last time you talked about horse stalls. Do you care to amend that?
Okay. All right. Well, and for anyone who didn't listen, so that I did have and I don't know if I got into this part, but I during college and grad school, I worked at a couple of different horse farms. And so the opening position that I applied for and got was cleaning the stalls. So I got that and eventually worked myself up to assistant trainer. But part of the things you do on a horse farm, like I helped geld a couple horses, and I've found out that people don't know what gelding is. So I've helped castrate a couple of horses.
Okay,
so,
that's what I thought it was.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
Thanks for
So,
confirming. Yes.
yes. So yeah, that was
That was
part of
a
the
new
job.
detail. That
Yes,
was a new
okay,
detail.
okay,
So I
okay.
appreciate that. Yes, I love it. I love it.
Can I tell a funny story about that?
Please,
I did
please.
give a talk, and that's why I elaborated. I gave a talk, and it was at a church, and I thought I was being so funny. I brought up the gelding of the horses, and like no one laughed, and I was talking to my host afterwards. I'm like, I hope I wasn't shocking, when I said that. I'm like, sorry, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And she goes, I don't know what it is. And so and then I realized, oh, no one knew what it was. So that's why they didn't laugh. So anyway, yeah, little inside baseball for farm people.
There you go. Oh, if you know, you know, sort of situation right there.
Oh.
That's good. Okay, so my final question then is, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody looking to bring God's kingdom more into their work?
Well, again, because I just wrote this book and it's on my mind, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say, look for the concrete ways you can incorporate truth, goodness, and beauty into it. But you have to be intentional. And if you don't know what that means, then you have to read my book.
There you go. There you go. Order the book. It's obviously something that we both are very passionate about. And this book is one I think you could read over and over, like I said earlier. And so I appreciate the work. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for hanging out and listening to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure that you like and subscribe, all the things, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. My hope is that this podcast just encourages you in your work, whatever that may be. So until next time, get out there and hustle.